So I have some housekeeping stuff that I'd like to start in on before I get in on the presentation. But first, a couple of funny stories. This past year has been a really big one for me. A couple of really big milestones. I turned 45, which was kind of cool and kind of not so at this very same time. From sort of the life expectancy perspective, I know that with each year that I get older, my life expectancy increases, not because of medical technology, just because I get older and I'm smart enough to make it through one more year, right? So just as an example, life expectancy at birth in 1972, I looked this up, was about 70 years, but life expectancy at age 65 was about 79 years, right? Not by virtue of medical technology changes, just by virtue of mostly getting through your teenage years. So I thought that was pretty cool in terms of, like this, I get older and hey, I'm gonna extend my life expectancy a little bit. And as I was looking at the numbers, I thought, oh crap, 45. 65, that's another 20 years to be standing up on stages like this talking to you guys about stats and numbers. So the best of times, sort of the worst of times as well. So that was a big one for me. Another one was we welcomed our second kid in just about a year ago. Really, really interesting. We have a 4-year-old now and a 2-year-old. And how many out there have kids? Put your hands up. Good proportion. How many have more than one kid? Like really good. Anyone more than 2? Oh my God, you guys are. I don't know what you guys are, but holy camolies. Having kids changes you. I don't know what the heck it is, but man, I like tear up at Disney movies now. Anybody with kids knows what I'm talking about. Anybody who doesn't is going, what is he talking about? But anyways, so a bit of a funny story as well. Our little guy was born about a year ago, April 27th. He was due actually on May 3rd. April 27th, I was actually supposed to be giving a keynote presentation to the Regional Prosperity Forum. And lo and behold, I wake up the morning of the 27th to head out to my presentation, and my wife says, I don't think you're going to your presentation today. I was like, no way, come on. It's just false start, right? Yeah. No false starts. And I was supposed to be on stage at 1:30 to give a presentation. What time do you guys think the little bugger arrived at? 1:30. Just about on the nose. Yeah, really interesting. So again, the best of times, not so much the worst of times. I haven't had a full night's sleep since. And then there's this new job opportunity that I have, which is absolutely fabulous. Definitely the best of times. For the big shout out to the guys at Rennie to welcome the Urban Futures team under the Rennie umbrella. We're going to do some really cool things. I can't believe the youthful enthusiasm at the office. I feel like the old guy with numbers who sits over in the corner a lot of the times. So certainly the best of times. But I would also say the worst of times in some contexts. When I got there, somebody said, watch out for the Rennie 15. I said, what the hell is the Rennie 15? They said, oh, just you wait. The Rennie 15 is tied to the warm plate of cookies, scones, and muffins that awaits us every morning as we arrive into the office. I got it. Springtime. This is winter, Andy. We're coming into summer, Andy. So really, really big thanks to the guys at Rennie and Associates as well. So this analogy of the best of times, the worst of times, it equally, as I see it, applies well to the real estate market right now. If you're an owner, best of times, right? You look at where prices have gone. A lot of wealth has been created within the Lower Mainland here, both on the residential as well as on the commercial side of things. As somebody looking to get into the market, you'd probably say it's just about the worst of times. How about being a tenant? Vacancy rate that's almost effectively 0, and rents going up. Very challenging time on that side as well. So we had a bit of a poll around the office. The marketing department got together to put a title together for me for this, and there was a long list of them. They ranged from to infinity and beyond, well, at least to 2036. Planning ahead, the sixth sense. I settled on this one, 420, feeling pretty high about growth. I thought that was kind of an interesting one. Yeah, a presentation by the guy behind the numbers. So the guy behind Bob Rennie's numbers, which is who I am. The reality was that it was the best of times, it was the worst of times. It's kind of where I ended up in terms of my title. A couple of final housekeeping items. we're going to present, or we're going to post the slides. Don't feel the need to scribble anything down. You can either get them through the UDI website, or they will be posted to rennie.com as well. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to get a hold of me at the office. You guys will know by the end of this presentation, if you don't already know me, I like to talk numbers, right? Okay. And then, oh yes, this most importantly, I was asked 2 favors as part of this presentation. Could I please shorten it down a little bit and maybe get rid of some of the Homer Simpson jokes? I was very hesitant about the Homer Simpson jokes. So what I ended up doing was I took the slides out of Homer Simpson and thereby reduced the number of slides, right? Yes. So I had a 50% reduction in the number of slides. I like Homer Simpson. It's very, very telling. But I'm down to about 120 slides. So are you guys ready? There we go. Hang on to your seats, as they say. So a quick outline. I'm going to go through some current market stats, and then I'm going to jump to our outlook to 2021 and beyond in terms of what our outlook is for the residential market here in the Lower Mainland. So current market stats. Now I'm going to go through this. So we've got I have a little bit of a different take. Rennie Intelligence has a bit of a different take on some of the March stats that were out than the current media. The current media tended to focus on decline from the highs that we saw last year. So here's what our take on it is. There's all property types in terms of sales for both the REB, GV, and FEREB board areas is down about 29%, almost 30% over last March. So big decline. This is what the media certainly focused on. And I guess just one other quick note. What I'm going to be talking about is by and large the Lower Mainland, the functional Lower Mainland region, the 2 board areas combined, not the GV-REB in and of itself. We certainly do have those numbers. But at some point, I'll probably be grayer, much older. We will start to talk about this region as a functional region rather than being broken up into these administrative regions of the Greater Vancouver region and the Fraser Valley region, or the 23 plus sub-municipalities, and we will have some kind of regional outlook as well. It will happen someday. You heard it here. So yes, 29% decline in the number of sales March to March. But that was actually up from the month previous, about 52%. So we did see a pretty dismal spring season, in large part driven by some of the weather that we saw out there as well. I know I didn't want to go out. So if we look backwards, though, back over the last decade, there's what the sales for all property types look like, and the red dots being March is going back. And if we look at that 10-year average, it's about 4,800 sales in your typical March or your average March going back. So what that says is that relative to this longer-term average, well, we were actually almost 20% above in terms of sales. Yes, if you compare it to the peak of sales last year, the 8,000, it looks like a big decline. Look at it in a little bit more holistic way. It doesn't actually look so bad from that particular context. How about the number of listings? Well, very similar. We're down about 12% March to March from year over year. But again, if we look at where that sort of longer term historical average was, it's about 20,000 on average for Marches. So we fall on the listing side about 44% below average. Compared to where we would typically be in this spring market. Very challenging with respect to sales going up and listings actually coming down, being very low level on that side. And this is even more reflected, or a little bit of a difference if we look at by product type. There's what the detached listings look like, about 7,002. It's about 29 or 30% below what the longer term average was. But we flip that around and we say, well, sales weren't down as much. Sales were down by about 8%. So this is sort of the economics of supply and demand. That wasn't me. Okay, I didn't move. Usually when you go in front of the speakers that happens, but nonetheless. So sales were only down by about 8%, but if we look at the condo and townhouse, much different picture emerges. Condo listings were down 61% below their longer term average, all-time record low with regard to the number of listings. But sales were up almost 50% above what their longer term averages were. So again, back to sort of the laws of supply and demand, what are the impact on prices? Townhouse listings, 55% below the longer-term March averages with this March, but sales for March relative to their long-term average were up almost 30%. So we've got a lot more people out there in terms of the sales, but a lot fewer listings out there compared to what our historical averages are. So if we look at the February-March change in listings, signs of a tight spring market. If it's the case that listings continue the pattern or the trend that we've seen in the current date to March, here's what it looks like. Month-over-month sales versus the month-over-month listings. Sales on average up 52% month-over-month, and for all product types, the number of listings down by 3%. So again, it doesn't take an economist to see in terms of, well, the end impact should be an upward pressure on prices. And if we sort of turn that around and look at the February-March change in prices, we certainly did see that. If we look at the month-over-month change, all product types were up about 1.5%. Condo, the highest, 2.4%. Townhomes, about 1.7%. But even the detached side of things was up 1% this month, and that's after 6 or 7 months of decline in terms of the benchmark price. So even the detached side of things is starting to turn around on that side, on the pricing, when we look to the benchmark prices. Here's what it looks like over the longer-term historical. I love the history. It gives us a better context of where we're certainly going. And you can look at the changes there. All product types, again, about 1.5% up month over month. The detached side 2.4, and 1.7 for condo and townhouse, respectively. So to further sort of highlight this tension between the number of listings out there and prices, this is an interesting one. If we wipe off that 10-year average and put on a running 12-month average to that chart to get rid of the seasonality and that bump up and down you see, and then we roll on top of that the benchmark price, you can see the correlation there as well. So to the degree that the market remains tight on the listing side of things, we're certainly going to see upward pressure on prices in the coming months. That's sort of it's an outlook in terms of where things are going to go, and I would expect that unless a whole bunch of people are sitting on the sidelines out there and flood into the market with regard to listings. I don't necessarily think that that's the case. That's sort of a personal view of things. I think that we were coming off a high last year in terms of people moving around. I think people in some senses may just be moved out. If you moved last year, you certainly don't want to move again. But you're also looking at these data saying there's not a heck of a lot of listings out there, so even if I did want to move, there's not a lot of stuff to buy. Competition is fierce out there. So this situation of relatively tight listings may persist through the spring market as well. All of this stuff, Rennie Intelligence compiles on a monthly basis. We compile it into what we call the Rennie Review, which is available to you guys as well. This is what it looks like. We go through and do the board areas and then sub areas as well. If you're interested, you can jump onto the website at rennie.com. This is, you go to the More tab and then Market Intelligence. I'm lobbying hard to carve out more real estate on the website for the Rennie Intelligence Group. I see Josh, our head of IT there, smiling away. So this will change certainly in the next bit as we carve out a little bit bigger real estate for Rennie Intelligence and begin to post more stuff for you guys generally as well on the website. All right. Now, part of my job over the last couple of years in working with Bob was to help compile stats each year that he would present at UDI. And every year we'd get together and I'd provide the update to the stats, and Bob would lean over the table of having coffee and say, "But Andy, some of these things I just don't know if folks get it." And I'd always say, "Bob, it's because you're not presenting the charts and the graphs." So I have the charts and the graphs. This is one of those things. This is Lower Mainland, all Lower Mainland sales, all product types throughout all of 2016. There was 108,023 sales last year. I got these data from BC Assessment last night at about 5 o'clock, so I churned away hard last night to get them in so that I could show you guys these. Average sale price last year, $886,000, all product types of those 102,000 sales. The median, a better measure in terms of looking at sales price, just like better to look at income in terms of median as well. It's basically the midpoint. You rank them all like that and you take the midpoint. It looks a little bit more reasonable, $595,000 with respect to the median sales price. We can also look at this in a little bit of a different way, and that's to break it up by certain groups, by quintiles or by quartiles. Here it is by quintiles if you split it all up. And the reason for doing this is so that you can segment out the top side of things. Look at sort of what your typical person would be out there buying. There's certainly your average person or typical person isn't going to be out there looking at the $31 million sale that's on that chart. They're going to fall somewhere within here. So if we do that, we can recalculate the statistics for the units that you or I might actually typically be out there buying. And what we find is that, yes, certainly the average of the top 20% of sales, the top quintile, was about $2.3 million. But if we look at the remaining 80%, 86,000 sales last year, 544,000. Looks much more reasonable, especially when you see the media quoting things like, oh, it's well over $1 million to get into housing in the city of Vancouver or the Lower Mainland now. Now, about 8:30, I managed to get this down and do it on the product type side. So here's what the detached sales look like, the same data. Top 20% of sales, yeah, wow, man, 3.2 million. Average of the remaining 80%, just under $1 million, 944,000 in 2016. That represented about 34,000 sales of detached properties in the Lower Mainland, that bottom 80% of it. It gets even more interesting if we look at attached and condo. Attached, the average of the top 20% was about 1.2 million, and the average of the remaining 80%, 468 grand. Looks much more reasonable from my side of things in terms of affordability and trying to get into the market. And on the condo side as well, that bottom, the bottom 80%, $367,000. That represented about 37,000 sales last year. I'm not saying that we don't have affordability issues here in the Lower Mainland. We certainly do. But when you look at it from this perspective, it doesn't look quite as bad as what the media portray with regard to getting into the market. Certainly, whoa. Hold on. That one was me. Hang on 2 seconds. No, maybe it's the guy at the back. Can we go back to my presentation, please? Oh, this is interesting. Hang on a second, guys. There we go. Okay. Ooh. Quick on my feet, right? So anyways, there's a different way of looking at the stats, sort of some of the stories behind the numbers. It's how we typically look at it as well. I'll get into some of the issues of looking at averages in a minute or two, but that's one of those things that I thought was really important, something that I've provided to Bob for the last good number of years that we've talked about that I think is important to actually show in a chart and a graph, because at least how my mind works, it makes a lot of sense. So, foreign buyer's tax. I thought I'd go through some of another couple of stats on the grab bag side of things here. There's what the foreign buyer's tax was before before the tax came in, up to 15.1. It averaged about 10% before the tax came in August. Right now we're about 3.7% in terms of the share going to foreign nationals. I checked into our data at Rennie. Really, really interesting. We tracked just about on par with, on the pre-sale side of things, pre-tax about 11%, and we remained about the same, about 11-12% in the post-tax environment, which says that, again, one of the things that the media were talking about was, well, everybody's going to get out of, or they're going to flood into the pre-sale market because there's no tax there. We haven't seen it in our data yet. So again, sort of peel back the onion on that one a little bit. Now, there's what it looks like for the Fraser Valley. Fell as well, no tax there, but nonetheless, spotty data, only about 1.1%. And with regard to people, those foreign purchasers being pushed to the capital region, well, it appears that it took them about 3 months to figure out where Victoria was on a map before they started to buy over there. A bit of a jump up, about 7.2, but they're back down to about 4.5%, what they were on average before the tax actually came in. So foreign buyers tax, interesting. Ontario is contemplating this as well. It's funny how Vancouver real estate prices are sort of out of the news now that Ontario's got this 33% increase in housing prices. It does reinforce that Ontario, yes, is the center of the world, right? And Toronto specifically. So experts weighed in on Toronto housing prices. Could Vancouver's tactics cool housing market work in Toronto? And then hot off the press this morning, they unveiled a plan to protect both tenants and home buyers. They're going to introduce, they're not calling it a foreign tax, they're calling it like a non-resident tax or something like that. 15% copying or copying here. They're also allowing municipalities, if they so choose, to impose a vacant home tax, which is the second thing that was a sort of a copycat of what we're doing here. But what they did is they took it one step further, and they're actually striking a provincial body to look at issues of how can they add supply, something that we fundamentally need to do here. So I'd say that they one-upped us, guys. So, if we can play catch up a little bit on that side, I think that's we should certainly do that in terms of trying to consider the issues of how do we get supply to the market a little bit faster as well. Okay, benchmark and average prices. We worked really hard to show that when the tax came in August, prices had actually already started to soften. Ryan and I, my colleague, work with the media a lot at the point here of people saying like, oh yeah, it's the tax that came in that pushed prices down. Well, prices actually started to come down in March if we look at either the average prices or the median prices within the Lower Mainland. And the benchmark price actually started to come down in September, a month after. And this is something that we sort of had to turn up again on more recently, as a lot of the media that was covering Toronto was saying, all we need to do is what Vancouver did, because as soon as they put the tax in, prices started to come down. And now our prices were starting to soften before the tax came in. So the degree to which it's going to soften prices there, I don't really know. They don't track the data like we do. We one up them on that side in terms of tracking it, but it'll be really interesting to see how this unfolds in Ontario over the coming 2 and 3 months. All right, BC Homeowner Partnership. This was an interesting one. It's 3 months in now, about 1,000 plus applications to the provincial government, 270 with purchase contracts, and they've led about a total of 4.1 million in loans, which if you do the backwards math on that, it's about 15 grand per loan, which is well below the 37,000 or 37 and change cap that they have, that they said you could go up to. Now, I would agree on the economic side that this particular program can be or will be price inflationary if it allows people to get into the market that weren't previously able to get into because of their finances. But it all depends on how it's administered. So if it's administered in such a way that the people can just go out and still buy the same house that they were going to go out and buy, but it helps reduce their mortgage payments, it's not going to be price inflationary. The degree to which it allows a whole bunch of people who previously weren't able to get into the market to get into the market, price inflationary. So this is another interesting one. We'll have to see how it plays out in the fullness of time. We've run some numbers on this, and I think in the fullness of the term that is allowed for the program, you save on average for an average loan about $1,000. It's not actually really big money. And we actually had somebody, a notary, say that yeah, but there's also potentially about a $500 cost in terms of doing all the paperwork. So net at the end of the day, I'll let you guys decide. All right, 2016 equity. This is another really fascinating one that I absolutely love that Bob and I talk about a lot, and I'm going to explain it in a chart and a graph. So bear with me on this side. There's the number of owned households in the Vancouver CMA by age across the bottom. 152,598 estimated 45 to 54-year-olds. There's the percentage of them who are mortgage-free. These are data from the 2011 census, aged demographically to account for population growth and change in housing change in the Lower Mainland, and a whole bunch of really cool stuff that, because I'm a data nerd, I can do. If we flip that around and say, what are the total number of households? There are the total number of mortgage-free households in the Vancouver CMA in 2016. Now, it's a predictable life cycle pattern. You get the older stage of the life cycle, you're supposed to pay down your mortgage, right? 30-year AM, 25-year AM, you get to the end of that, that's fine and great. Through the census, we can also get what the average value of those households are. There's what it is from 2016 advanced forward, given what price changes have been in the Lower Mainland. And again, because I'm a nerd, I can do the math between those two things, and what it says is that with respect to estimated total mortgage-free equity in the Vancouver Census Metropolitan Region, it's about $314 billion. Massive. Absolutely massive. Now, if I flip that around and just say, okay, what about this big post-World War II boom? Well, they represent about 159 million of that. Or if I take the whole of the 55 and better population in the Vancouver CMA, it's about 221 billion. So there's a lot of equity out there. And what implication does this have? Well, there are in that population 139,000 boomer households, and there's where their kids are entering the market. So what does it say? It says that, yes, there's a lot of equity out there. There's also a very significant impact on prices within the market as a result of some of this equity transfer as well. So I thought I'd walk through a really quick example for you. Let's take a couple family household. This is from the census. On average income is about $75,706. 4.64% interest rate, because that's the Bank of Canada post rate that you have to qualify at right now. 30% gross debt service ratio, check. They make it, okay? 25-year AM in terms of their mortgage, they should be able to walk into a bank and get a loan for about a maximum of $331,000 with that income. Obviously, they're going to get more because although they qualify at the 4.64, they could probably go out and get a 2.3, right? So nonetheless, this is going to allow them, with their 5% down, because they've been really good, scrimped and saved, of $17,472 to come up and get a purchase price of $349,499. But mom and dad come along. Oh, and by the way, as an aside, because I checked my data late last night, there was 21,522 sales below that 350,000 mark in 2016 in the Lower Mainland region. So a good number of sales. It's about 20% of all sales. Interesting. Cliff Clavin fact for the day. So, but back to the bank of mom and dad. Bank of mom and dad come along and say, but you know what? They don't tell this to the kids. They're saying, we really want to get you guys out of the house, but we're going to help you out. What they tell the kids is, we want to help you out and we want to get you over that pesky CMHC financing, right? And the insurance there. So we're going to make it so that you make a 25% down payment. So they come up and say, great, we're going to give you that cash. This is something that's happening. This is from Rate Hub. 42% of first-time home buyers in BC received help from their parents. It certainly is happening. It's happening across the country. We're a little bit higher, I think, again, in part because of this large amount of equity that's been built within that post-World War II boom generation. So they add that $93,000. They come up with $110,000 for the 25% down payment. And there's two options now for that couple household. They can either reduce their mortgage down to $238,000 and reduce their monthly payments. Man, that would be a great thing to do, right? Or they could turn around and go and purchase a house for $442,000. They get granite, man. Like, it's stainless steel appliances now. What do you think's going to happen, right? Duh. They're going to go out and do the $142,000 property. But watch this. What that does is that's almost a 30% increase in that household's purchasing power with regard to the open market, right? It's also a 30% increase with regard to the ratio of the purchase price to that household's income. It goes from about a ratio of about a 4.6 times to a ratio of about 5.6 times. And right now, all of a sudden what's happened is that historical metric of sales price to income is totally blown out of the water. So what am I saying here? I'm saying two things. Equity of that post-World War II boom is having a very significant impact on housing prices here in the Lower Mainland and across the country. And let's stop comparing sales prices to average household income. It's just a fundamentally stupid metric. We can go by it. We have better metrics to look at. I'm sorry if you're from the Royal Bank or any of the guys that have these price indexes that are built on that, but nonetheless. So there you go. There's my 2 cents on that. Big impact on that side. So there's some Cliff Clavin stats for the history of side of things. Let's go to 2021 and beyond. This is where I have a lot of fun. Total population in the Lower Mainland. 2.89 million folks today. There's the growth rate. Components of change. Everybody always wants to talk about immigration, right? So I always like to talk about aging. It's what I sort of experience every day as I get older and grayer, but everybody wants to talk about immigration. So let's talk about immigration. We'll start at that point. Net immigration and Lower Mainland, 25,173 folks last year in terms of net immigration. In terms of going forward, I have to look up to the Canada level for this. There's the components of change in Canada. 320,000 immigrants last year, largest on record. That was by and large because of the welcoming in of all of the refugees. At that point, our immigration rate, number of immigrants divided out by our population, increased to about 0.9%. Historically, on average, we're about 0.75 is generally where we are, and about 300,000 in terms of immigration. Speaking with Minister McCallum, he had said that a lot of that immigration, those papers were processed out of country because it was the refugees. We physically don't have the capacity internally in Canada to process more than about 300,000 in a year, but they're going to try and do so and ramp the department up. Here's our forecast going from a 0.9% immigration rate back down to about a 0.7 in the short term, but then increasing up to about 0.83 and then down to about 0.78. What this results in is an immigration level that, again, this year should be just north of 300,000, but by the end of the projection period, up in the range of about 300,000 people. So for some, this may be a robust outlook in terms of immigration. For others, it's a super conservative one. Rethinking Immigration, the case for 400,000. This was floated just a while ago by a federal panel that was looking at labor productivity and economic growth. The 400,000 solution, why are they postulating or why are they talking about this? Well, it's because of this aging population that we have Canada-wide and a very significant change with regard to the ratio of people working, paying into the system, and people retiring and retirees, people drawing on the system. Right now, 2012, the estimate was about 4.2 workers per senior, and by 2036, these are StatsCan's projections, it's going to fall down to about 2.3 people in the workforce actively contributing per senior citizen. So big dramatic change. I don't know if we'll get to 400,000 nonetheless. Our forecast in terms of net immigration, if we go up to that 320,000 level, that means that net immigration here in the Lower Mainland would go up to about 41,000 people a year. Interprovincial migration is another big driver down here. What we have to look at here is look at it on the quarterly side. We're actually above average with regard to the most recent quarter, obviously down from the sort of the previous quarters when people move a lot, but nonetheless about 3,292 people migrating from other places in Canada. Q1 to Q4 2016, we actually picked up 10,500 from Alberta. This is the big push out of the province of Alberta. That represented about half of all of the net interprovincial migrants that we saw. Really significant. Next biggest province was Ontario. We picked up about 2,800. Now the other interesting thing is, given the scale of Ontario's population, look at Saskatchewan and Manitoba. We picked up about the same number from Manitoba and Saskatchewan, but much smaller populations as well. So in looking forward, this is the landscape that we see right now. We see those numbers sort of coming down a little bit. Alberta's economy, Ontario's economy, and BC's economy are all tied for top growers in the next couple of years, about 2.1% growth. I see a lot of some of the Alberta migrants who came here being repatriated, moving back as the economy starts to roll back there a little bit as well. So in terms of net interprovincial, we're forecasting in the range of about 6,300, 6,400 net interprovincial migrants to the Lower Mainland going forward. Net intra-provincial migration. This is people moving within the province. Now the reason why it increases, not a lot of people know that net interprovincial migration from the Lower Mainland is actually negative. So what that means is every year there's more people moving to other places in BC than there are coming from other places in BC to the Lower Mainland. It increases. Our outlook on this is we deem this to be the equity refugees. The older couple in Dunbar who may have bought at $160,000 and now are looking at $4 million, or the older couple in Surrey who bought for $26,000. It just happens to be 2 or 3 acres. Moving on. So, and then we have this component of natural increase. That's just the annual difference between births and deaths. The really neat thing about natural increase, if I extend my model out just a couple more years, natural increase actually becomes natural decrease. And at that point, I think in our models, it's 2039, I think is what it is. All net growth in the Lower Mainland is going to be as a result of migration. Yeah, really neat. More deaths than there are births every year. So, no, you guys don't think that's really neat? No. Okay, well, whatever. You got to be a nerd, I guess, right? So anyways, moving right along, 2.89 million folks today. There's what it looks like just with regard to aging and mortality of the existing population. 2.4 million, just about 500,000 deaths, which may sound like a lot, but here's a really cool stat. 82% of you guys, us, are still going to be here in 2036. Isn't that cool? Yeah. We're still going to be potentially clamoring on the housing market as well, right? Yeah. Okay, some of us, we will figure out how to procreate, yes, but the number of births will actually just about compensate for the number of deaths over that period. And then we add this component of migration in, and our forecast is about 3.8 million people by the end of the projection period. So that is about 934,000 more residents, about 32% growth between now and 2036. This is a different geography than what Metro is looking at, but in terms of the rates of growth or the relative or absolute change, similar to what Metro's projections are, we're a little bit higher. We've got a little bit more robust assumption about what immigration was. Same with regard to BC statistics as well, if you were to dig up their projections. Okay, and as a point of comparison, historically over the last 2 decades, two-decade time periods, we added about 725,000 people to the region. So what it means is that the forecast, if we look at that 320,000 at the national level and the implications for here, we're actually going to add more people on average going forward than what we have over the last 2 decades. So from a housing perspective, it certainly is going to be relatively challenging. Population is going to grow. It's also going to change really significantly. There's what the population looks like to a demographer, males and females, and increasing age up the side. 660,000 boomers between the ages of 52 and 70 in 2016. There is the buster generation, me, 33 to 51. Anybody want to guess? Bigger. 795,000 people in that population. Yeah, there's the millennial generation as well. Now, it looks like it gets skinnier too, doesn't it? Fewer people? What do you think? 737, more than the boomers. Really, really fascinating that we've clicked over this sort of notion of the post-World War II boom being the biggest generation. They were when they came through. Hate to tell you guys this, but they're starting to die now. It's going to get smaller and smaller and smaller. Sorry about your luck. Yeah. So what does it look like going forward? As they age and that top, the top actually is not going to, the top will get smaller as a result of mortality, but the top of that profile is going to get significantly bigger as a result of aging and the big stock of people who are already here in the under 65-year-old age groups. There's what it looks like by 2036, and you can see that big growth in that 35 to 55 population in the Lower Mainland. Here's how it looks sort of on an age group basis. The youth, the kids, 0 to 24, 18% growth, 140,000 more. Midsection, the workers, 23% growth, 382,000. But check this whomper out. Are you ready? 91% growth, almost a doubling, 411,000 more seniors. So for every senior in our population today, there would almost be 2 by 2036. Really, really interesting. Big, big change with regard to the demography. This picture equally applies to Canada as a whole. So some pretty significant implications for housing here as well, as we have that big growth at the top of the profile, but also big growth with regard to those who are forming families and the family formation side of things. The degree to which the top guys stick around and loiter in their housing creates challenges for those trying to get into the housing market, right? So how do we get at this? This is where we sort of get a little bit nerdy here. This is how we get at it. It's called the life cycle of housing occupancy. It's the age-specific household maintainer rate, if you want to be technical about it. Here's how it works. So if we look at the younger side of things, 16% of the 20 to 24-year-old age group are primary household maintainers. That says on the census form, they check off and say, I'm primarily responsible for the finances of this house. Where's everybody else? Well, they're either living with their mom and dad, or they're living in a house with a whole bunch of other students. Only can be one primary household maintainer. You go to the 25 to 29-year-old age group, the rate increases to 35% as people start to get out of, oh my God, somebody just told me I have 3 minutes to go. You know what? We're hanging out. It's good. I'm going to go faster. Let's take the example of 1,000 people within this sort of life cycle of housing occupancy. Okay. 20 to 24-year-olds, 160 homes because they've got a 16% maintainer rate. 5 years later, 25 to 29, they would demand or require 350 homes. 5 years after that, as they get 5 years older, 44% household maintainer rate, 444 homes demanded. So over the course of a decade, there would be a 2.75 times increase in housing occupancy demand from the same group of people without adding another person to the region. This is what happened in Canada, in the Lower Mainland, as that post-World War II boom got out of mom and dad's houses and the housing market expanded really, really rapidly. Where are the boomers now? They sit at this point, where maintainer rates are relatively high. It's not until we get over the age of 84, 85, that maintainer rates for private housing start to decline. This is the point at which people either move in with their kids, and they're no longer primary household maintainers, or they move into non-private forms of accommodation, collective seniors institutions, or into hospitalization. So again, this life cycle of housing occupancy has some pretty significant implications when you relate it back to the population. Here's what it looks like on a structure type basis, ground-oriented and apartment units. And if we relate that life cycle of housing occupancy back to the population forecast, we can get an assessment of how many units would be required in order to accommodate the region's future population. So there's the population that I presented, 933,000 more. That would require about 438,000 more dwelling units to be added between now and 2036. So do the math on that, 47,000 people a year. It's the equivalent of about 22,000 new dwelling units each year added. In terms of that aggregate 438,000, that would be like the equivalent of adding a city of Vancouver, current day, plus Burnaby, plus New Westminster to this region in the next 2 decades. Pretty significant notion of growth in that side of things. We can look at it on a structure type basis as well. 267,000 ground-oriented units, about 171,000 apartment units demanded over that particular period of time. But what about all the boomers that are going to die? Well, they're in there. We take a demographic approach so that we account for that. Here's what I mean. Here's population change going this way, 35 to 44 population. Yes, between 2016 and 2036, 148,000 more of them. But if we take a cohort approach and track them through, well, because that group would actually grow by about 37,000 as all of them became 55 to 64-year-olds. But look at the next age group. The 431,000 45 to 54-year-olds would be reduced by 20,000 as they hit that 60 to 74-year-old age group because some of them die. Right? We can do this with regard to the housing occupancy demand as well and calculate or look at what the cohort change would be. And what we found in doing this, we found that, yeah, you guys are right, about 223,000 units would be freed up as a result of that post-World War II boom generation dying and moving out. Right? That said, the cohorts that are coming in, the top side of that, the younger guys, plus 662,000. So, much in excess of what the number of units that are going to be freed up, and this is where we come up with our net of 438,000 in terms of net additions. Sorry to get super nerdy on you, but I had to go through the numbers. Really, really interesting. So how about future housing supply? Is supply going to meet up with that particular demand? Well, one of the data sources we can look at is CMHC starts on this side. Starts are actually at an all-time high, 27,000 this year. Before you sort of get your knickers in a knot, it's well above that long-term average of about 18,600. We actually had a bunch of periods where we fell well below that as well. In the late 1990s, only about 8,900. But what we really need to do is turn this around and look at it, not relative to a long-term average, but what potential occupancy demand was, right? There's another source, and then there's completions as well. We completed about 19,000 units. Should certainly come up. There's another data source, Urban Analytics, that we can look at for the multifamily supply that's coming online. Big shout out to the guys at UA. They do a great job in terms of driving around, collecting all the information for the projects that are currently selling. Their database shows about 16,500 units in 17, 10,800 multifamily units in 18, down to about 8,700 in 2019, and then we sort of roll it out to 2022. What it says is that of the stuff that is currently under construction is about 49,000, almost 50,000 units under construction that will come to market in that period. But that said, there's another 104,000 that are contemplated or on the books and sort of in the planning stages as well. So again, another data source that we look at in terms of trying to develop this outlook for potential supply. So let's go back to that. Their starts and completions starts at 27,000. If we look at that starts and then lag them with completions, look at the Urban Analytics database, there's what our model completions are, up to about 26,000 next year and tapering off into the range of about 24. And if I chalk up occupancy demand relative to that of about 21,000, it looks like supply is well in excess of what demand is. And I'm going to say yes, it is, and I'm also going to say that is a good thing. If we look at the last couple of years, back to 2009, 2010, 2011, 2012, very, very tight with respect to what was coming to market relative to what occupancy demand would have been. So in some senses, that 26,000 that may come in line in 2017, 2018 is just going to make up for a lack of building in the pre-2016 period as well. What it says, what we also need to recognize is some of those starts and completions are going to go to what's called replacement demand, just to replace old units that are already there. It's anywhere from about 2 to 5%, so we need to give ourselves at least about a 2 to 5% slush with regard to the difference between completions and occupancy demand, just again to replace that old ratty single detached house that needs to be replaced. So this, in my mind, is a really good picture for the Lower Mainland as well. Okay. One rub on that. If I go back to the Urban Analytics database, what I find is that of the units in 2017 that are going to come online, 97% of them are already sold. If I look to 2018, 93%. 2019, 91%. So the stuff that is going to come online is already by and large sold. So again, a bit of a different take on that as well in terms of the stuff, the supply that's coming online relative to the demand as well. So, and then if I look further afield out to the post-2020 period, it's about 83% sold as well with regard to the UA database. So really, really interesting data and stats on this. Okay, so I thought I'd shift gears to finish up here, and Lower Mainland region. If I look at this one, there, as per the 2011 to 2016 census, are all the parts of this region that experienced population decline. Now, West Vancouver hit the media when all of the census stuff came out because the municipality as a whole declined. But again, because I'm a nerd, I wanted to go in and look at it on the small area side, and that's what it looked like throughout the whole region. Now, it becomes even more interesting if I stick with where the potential development projects are coming online and the scale of those as well. And a data guy would say there's a really good negative correlation between where the locations of those developments are and where the decline has been. That's just a real nerdy way of saying, like, hey guys, where you're not adding units, you're seeing population decline, right? And that certainly is the case. If I look back historically as well to projects that have come online, we've certainly done a good job at focusing on adding stuff in the corridors. We've got to do a much better job if we're going to accommodate future population growth in looking at the non-corridor areas as well. Now, I was at a Board of Trade event earlier in the week, and I stood up and said, we really need to get rid of RS1 zoning. And it's in its traditional notion. It's something that I have said for years, Bob has said as well. But this just isn't a City of Vancouver issue. This is a regional issue. We need to look at, for that next generation, how to get them into the housing market. And unless we can unlock some of the supply that's currently sitting in 50-foot lots and plus through the region, we're going to be significantly challenged. Because there's only so many people that want to live along Kingsway and listen to the number 19 bus trundle along every 7 minutes, right? This also becomes kind of interesting if you look at what the landscape of residential land is. That is the total amount of urban land that is within the region. If I do the quick math on that, it's about 102,000 acres of residential land. And if I take that as a fixed number, we're not going to make any more of it, and I look at my dwelling unit increase, we're going to need to see about a 40% increase in density, in residential density in this region by 2036. That's from about 9.6 units per acre to about 12.6. Where is that going to happen? It can't all happen on the corridors. We've got to bust this out, and we've got to get into some of those areas that are starting to see population declines as well, and unlock some of that supply. So I thought I'd leave you with 2 quick quotes. Here we go. As our population continues to grow, as we develop a large domestic market, as the Pacific Rim continues to grow, so too will BC prosper. The center of population and commerce in BC is concentrated in Vancouver and the Lower Fraser Valley, a relatively small area with finite boundaries. This, of course, is the reason why our land prices will be relatively high. Does anybody want to hazard a guess when that was from? Could have been posted last year, right? All the complaints? Yeah, 1976. Okay, how about this one? Prices are too high, higher than anybody would warrant. Working people can no longer afford to pay the prices being demanded. The same thing was said 20 years ago, 10 years ago, and 5 years ago. Okay, anybody want to hazard a guess when that one was said? 1911. Thank you for that. Welcome to it, folks. Thank you so much for your time and hanging out.